Your flashlight flickered as it tried to penetrate the all-consuming darkness around you. The facility stood silent, as imposing as ever. It was a travesty that you were sent alone into the bowels of this factory, demonstrating just how disposable you were to your contractors. You breathed quietly in your heavy gear as your feet pushed you forward. The building was mostly made out of concrete and metal. Countless dead ends, and judging by the cobwebs, there was at least a bunker spider infestation. Thankfully, you haven't seen one of them yet. Maybe, just maybe, you could get out of this without even seeing one of them. You stopped at a T-shaped catwalk. A door in front of you and a door to your left. You gulped and decided to go left first. Your heart pounded as you placed your hand on the door handle. Exhaling, you threw it open. The room was brightly lit, thankfully. Seemed like no direct dangers. You took your first step, only to hear a noise above you. Shrieking, you managed to quickly roll out of the way of the Snare flea. As it slapped on the ground like a piece of wet, chitin-covered meat, it wiggled on the floor for a moment. Taking this opportunity, you rushed to the other side of the room. Snare fleas were dangerous critters. Unlike most other aliens living inside the moon facilities, they were ambush predators, hiding on the ceilings of rooms which were often left unchecked by more unattentive employees of the company. As this one just failed to do, they then fall from the ceiling, landing on the victim's head, ensnaring them and slowly crushing them. The helmet you were wearing could probably resist one of these for a few seconds, but you didn't want to risk it. The flea approached you, crawling on the ground like a centipede, most likely going for a ground assault out of sheer frustration. Luckily, you could easily evade it in the big room. It wasn't that fast. Running out, you slammed the door shut. You could hear the beast's tiny legs crawl at the metal door as it tried to still reach you. Your breath hitched as it slammed itself against it. Returning the favor, you pushed yourself with all your strength until the Snare flea gave up. You could hear it as it crawled back above the door, readying itself to pounce again. You sighed. Well, that was enough adventure for a lifetime. But you have a quota to fulfill. There was no break for you just yet. Groaning, you turned around and went through the door you probably should have gone through in the first place. Behind it was a long, dark hallway leading into a lit-up room. Just in case you checked the ceiling. Nope, no fleas. Thank God. As you walked down the hallway, you were half expecting the flashing eyes of a bracken. Yeah, that would be the cherry on top. These shadowy nightmare creatures were responsible for many sleepless nights, and not in the fun way. Your cautious mind was responsible for not accepting the respite of the echoing hallway. As the moment you stepped out of it, into what seemed to be an old abandoned boiler room, the mental alarm bells rung once more. An eerie feeling of something watching you. The boiler room was relatively dark. There was only one working light here, the one you were right under. The one that was right above your head right now. The floor was made up of darkened concrete, covered with a thin layer of black soot and grey dust. The walls were covered in claw marks and ancient dried blood. Something terrible had happened here. You stepped forward with bated breaths. Your environmental suit suddenly notified you of potential hazardous materials that could be around, though it didn't specify anything. Most likely something automated because it just barely managed to pick up something, a trace of it, probably long gone by now. You stepped closer to the wall, touching one of the claw marks. They weren't too deep, though that didn't mean much. Anything that could keep scratching like this after a swipe like that could still cut you in half with a single attack. As you turned around to explore the rest of the boiler room, you noticed something on the ground. Quietly you approached. It was an old can of soda. The tin thing looked swollen, ready to burst at a moment's notice. But the company did consider it as scrap. And since weight was one of the factors involved in your payment, well, it was better than nothing. You crouched down to pick it up. Though, as you leaned up again, your back hit something that wasn't there a second ago. In the same motion you looked up, your terrified eyes falling upon the grotesque visage of a Coil head. Its mouth opened in a silent scream as its empty eye socket stared down at you. This must have been what your suit warned you about. They posed an extremely high threat level to any employee of the company. They were mannequin-like creatures with short arms and a torso covered in painful-looking nails. Its screaming head attached to a spring was bobbing up and down as it stared you down. There was but one rule regarding coil heads that every employee knew. Don't try and fight it. You will lose. The only upside was these things were practically harmless as long as eye contact remained. And luckily, your suit hit your eyes. Meaning as long as your helmet pointed at it, it would remain dormant. Its arms were hovering right over your head. Though one thing was strange about this one. Of course, this wasn't even your first encounter with this species. A bead of sweat ran down your forehead as you slightly lowered your gaze. Its body was more toned than the ones you had seen before. If other coil heads were grocery store mannequins, this one might as well have been a designer store mannequin. And that's when you jump back into the wall. Your gaze just grazed over what was between the thing's legs. You fought the carnal urge to cover your eyes. Oh God, it was so thick and veiny. Well, as long as you looked at the coil head, it wouldn't move. You took a step back. Pressed against the wall, you kept facing it as you slowly scrounged away to the side. Facing the coil head, you now began walking backwards through the way that you had come. Whenever something blocked your cone of vision, you could hear the coil head's now loud footsteps echo throughout the facility. You begged to whatever deity was out there to save your life. The backwards walk through the facility was a nerve-wracking nightmare. You never were entirely sure if you walked the right way, unless some major detail was super obvious to you, like the spider webs. You blinked, almost looking away from the coil head. Oh god, the spider webs. You had almost forgotten them. Your heart. It beat so fast it felt as if it was going to burst. Tears slowly rolling down your eyes. But then, finally, you felt light, and then you saw it. Well, technically you saw it. You had finally managed to reach the entrance room. The ventilation fan above the entrance door humming uncaringly. And finally you risked taking your eyes off the coil head to open the door. Its steps became loud so quickly that you screamed, and just as you were about to take your first step outside, you felt your head be grabbed from behind and thrown onto the hard concrete ground. Your visor shattered as fresh, thankfully breathable air made its way into your environment suit. You couldn't even scream. You were too petrified from fear and pain. It may have been this moment you could have rolled around and stared at the coil head, but your entire body wasn't reacting. You could hear the monster's springy neck as it moved over you, pinning you down with its knees. While it ran lightning fast, its movements now were slow, calculated. Its hands felt over your back. Your muscles tensed every time its fingers rubbed over a sensitive place. You blushed hard, feeling weird. On one hand, you were fearing for your life. On the other, it was touching you curiously and gently. And judging by what the thing was packing down there, oh god, a horrifying thought overcame you. You managed to crawl forward just a little on all fours, but the thing immediately punished it by grabbing your right ankle and pulling you back just a tiny bit. You blinked. You still were mostly outside. The thing was toying with you. You tried to roll on your side to look at it, but obviously the coil head knew that you looking at it would freeze it in place. So the sentient mannequin dug its fingers into your thighs, making you squeak like a dog toy. And you remained still. The coil head then grabbed your oxygen tank, ripping at it, tearing at it. You bent backwards painfully, and you yelped. With a panic and defeated sigh, you opened the belt around your chest. Relieved, you fell forward as the coil head discarded the tanks. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Its hands clasped around the remains of your helmet. With one mighty tug, and the loud, unmistakable creak of breaking metal and ripping seams, it was removed from your head. It too was thrown away. Wind blew through your hair, and the coldness of the planet was caressing your cheeks like the touch of death itself. You knew what the coil had wanted, and no fighting against it would save you from it. Its massive hand gripped the back of your head tightly, preventing you from turning your head. He pulled you up by your hair, forcing you to stand. His other arm reached around you. The coil head groped your chest brutally and uncaringly. You squirmed in its touch, as despite all of your efforts of hating every second of it, Your brain was sending out pleasure signals, probably in a desperate attempt to keep your sanity. You moaned and groaned. And suddenly, it stopped moving, as if someone was staring at it. But there was no one else on the moon, and animals didn't activate its dormant state. In reality, the monster was merely calculating its next move. And then, without warning, it gripped your suit's collar, tearing at it. And as afraid as you were, you huffed. The tearing hurt a lot, and you slapped the monster's wrist, mostly out of pure instinct and without thinking. Offended, the creature stopped, but didn't retreat its hand. With tears running down your face, you took hold of the suit's zipper. "Please," you sobbed, your voice a mere whisper as you opened up your suit, allowing the perverted monster full access to your supple flesh. "If I let you do this, please let me live," you begged.
Thank you to the people who are supporting me on Ko-fi. You guys are keeping me alive.